The morning sun cast long shadows across the makeshift courtroom in Busan. Captain Kim Tae-ho adjusted his military cap and looked at the woman standing before him. The room smelled of dust and fear. Outside, the sounds of war echoed through the streets. Trucks rumbled past carrying wounded soldiers. Artillery fire boomed in the distance. Kim had been a judge for only 3 months. Before the war, he taught law at Seoul National University. Now he wore a captain's uniform and decided the fate of civilians caught in the chaos. The Provisional Military Court operated from a damaged school building. Broken windows let in the September heat and the constant noise of a city under siege. The woman before him stood straight despite her torn clothes. Her name was Ji-woo, according to the arrest report. She appeared to be in her 30s, with intelligent eyes that met his gaze without flinching. Her hands were dirty, but her posture spoke of education and dignity. "You are accused of stealing medical supplies from the military depot on Harbor Street," Kim read from the paper in front of him. His voice echoed in the empty classroom that served as his courtroom. 2 military police officers stood guard near the door. A tired-looking clerk sat at a small desk, ready to record the proceedings. Ji-woo remained silent. Kim noticed she did not look afraid, which surprised him. Most civilians brought before military courts trembled with fear. The penalty for theft of military supplies could be severe, especially during wartime. The evidence shows you were found with bandages, medicine, and food rations that belonged to the army, Kim continued. He was hungry and exhausted. The previous night, Chinese and North Korean forces had pushed closer to the Busan perimeter. Everyone knew the situation was desperate. The United Nations forces held only a small area around the port city. If they lost Busan, they would be pushed into the sea. "Do you deny taking these supplies?" Kim asked. Ji-woo finally spoke. Her voice was calm and clear. "I do not deny having those supplies, but I did not steal them." Kim frowned. The military. Police had caught her red-handed. She carried a bag full of military medical supplies through the refugee camps outside the city. Thousands of displaced people lived in those camps, struggling to survive. "Then how did you obtain them?" Kim asked. "I requisitioned them through proper channels," Ji-woo replied. "I have the authority to distribute emergency supplies to civilians in need." Kim almost laughed. This woman, dressed in torn civilian clothes, claimed to have official authority. Many people had tried similar lies to escape punishment. The war had created chaos, and some people took advantage of the confusion to steal and profit from others' suffering. "What authority?" Kim asked. "Show me your papers." Ji-woo's expression tightened slightly. "My documents were lost when Seoul fell to the communists. I had to evacuate quickly with only the clothes I was wearing." Kim sighed. Another refugee story. He had heard dozens of similar tales. People claimed to be teachers, doctors, government officials, anything that might help their case. The truth was often impossible to verify. Records had been destroyed, buildings bombed, and officials scattered or killed. "Without documentation, I cannot verify your claims," Kim said. "The penalty for theft of military supplies during wartime is severe. The army needs every bandage and every pill to treat our wounded soldiers." Through the broken window, Kim could hear ambulances arriving at the field hospital next door. Young men screamed in pain as medics carried them inside. The North Korean army had modern Soviet weapons and showed no mercy. Every day brought fresh casualties. "I understand the seriousness of the situation," Ji-woo said, "but those supplies were not stolen. They were legally distributed to prevent disease and death in the refugee camps." Kim studied her face. She spoke with confidence and used formal language. Her manner suggested education and experience with official procedures. But he had learned not to trust appearances. Desperate times made liars of honest people and thieves of the previously law-abiding. "The military police found you distributing these supplies without proper authorization," Kim stated. "That constitutes theft, regardless of your intentions." The heat in the room was becoming unbearable. Kim's uniform stuck to his back with sweat. He wanted to finish this case quickly and move on to the next one. His docket was full and the war waited for no one. Ji-woo remained silent for a long moment. Kim could see her thinking, weighing her options. Finally, she spoke again. "Captain." "Kim, may I ask you a question?" Kim nodded, curious despite his impatience. "What is the purpose of law during wartime?" she asked. The question caught Kim off guard. He had expected her to plead for mercy or offer some excuse. Instead, she challenged him with legal philosophy. "Law maintains order," Kim replied automatically. "It prevents chaos and protects society." "And who does society include?" Jiwoo pressed. "Only soldiers, or also the civilians they protect?" Kim felt uncomfortable under her steady gaze. Something about this woman was different from the other cases he had handled. Kim stared at the woman before him. Her question about law and society hung in the air like smoke from the burning buildings outside. He had never been asked such a thing in his makeshift courtroom. Most people just begged for mercy or tried to make excuses. "Answer my question, Captain," Jiwoo said quietly. "Who does the law protect during war?" Kim shifted in his chair. The wooden seat creaked under his weight. He was tired of philosophical discussions when people were dying just outside these walls. "The law protects everyone who follows it," he said finally. Jiwoo nodded slowly. "Then let me tell you who I really am." She reached into her torn jacket pocket. The two military police officers tensed and moved forward, but she pulled out only a small damaged photograph. She placed it on Kim's desk. Kim picked up the photo. It showed a woman in black judicial robes standing behind a large wooden desk. The face was definitely Jiwoo, but she looked different. Her hair was neat, her clothes clean and proper. Behind her hung the flag of South Korea and official court seals. "My name is Judge Lee Jiwoo," she said clearly. "I served at Seoul District Court for 8 years before the war began." Kim felt his stomach drop. He studied the photograph more carefully. The woman in the picture wore the distinctive collar insignia of a district judge. The setting was clearly an official courtroom, much grander than his current broken classroom. "This could be anyone," Kim said, though his voice lacked conviction. The resemblance was unmistakable. "Look at the case number on the desk in the photo," Jiwoo said. "Case 1950-127, the Lee family inheritance dispute. I ruled on it 3 days before North Korea invaded." Kim squinted at the small writing visible in the photograph. He could barely make out numbers that might match what she claimed. His hands began to shake slightly. "You said your documents were lost," Kim managed to say. "Everything was lost," Jiwoo replied. "When the communist forces reached Seoul, I was ordered to evacuate immediately. No time to gather personal papers. I grabbed this photo from my desk and ran." She pointed to the military supplies that sat as evidence on a nearby table. "Those medical supplies were not stolen, Captain Kim. As a civil authority, I requisitioned them for emergency distribution. The military supply officer, Sergeant Park, can verify this if you contact him." Kim's head began to pound. If this woman was telling the truth, he had just sentenced a fellow judge to punishment for performing her legal duties. The implications made him feel sick. "Why didn't you tell me this immediately?" Kim asked. "Would you have believed me?" Jiwoo responded. "A woman in torn clothes claiming to be a judge? You would have thought I was lying to escape punishment." Kim knew she was right. He had heard similar claims from dozens of refugees. People claimed to be doctors, teachers, government officials, anything that might help their case. He had learned to ignore such stories without proof. "The refugee camps needed medical attention," Jiwoo continued. "Children were dying from preventable diseases. Elderly people suffered from infected wounds. I had the legal authority to requisition emergency supplies, so I did." Through the window, Kim could hear children crying in the camps outside the city. The sound had become so constant that most people stopped noticing it. But now it seemed louder, more urgent. "Sergeant Park from the supply depot," Kim said slowly. "You said he could verify your story." "Yes, he questioned my authority at first, just as you did. But when I explained the legal basis for emergency requisition during wartime evacuation, he understood. He even helped me organize the distribution." Kim stood up from his chair and walked to the broken window. Outside, he could see the sprawling refugee camps. Thousands of people lived in tents and makeshift shelters. Smoke rose from cooking fires and overcrowded medical stations. These people had lost everything when they fled the communist advance. He turned back to face Jiwoo. "If you are really a judge, then you understand the position I am in." "I understand completely," she replied. You have a duty to uphold military law during wartime. You cannot simply take the word of every person who appears before you. Kim appreciated that she did not seem angry, despite his obvious mistake. A lesser person might have demanded immediate release and apology. Instead, she spoke with the calm professionalism he would expect from a colleague. But I also understand, Jiwoo continued, that law without justice becomes meaningless. Those supplies saved lives, Captain Kim. Children who would have died from infection are now recovering. Elderly refugees who face starvation now have enough food to survive another day. Kim returned to his desk and sat down heavily. The weight of his error pressed down on him like the oppressive September heat. If Jiwoo was telling the truth, and he increasingly believed she was, then he had nearly condemned an innocent woman for performing acts of mercy. "How can I verify your identity?" Kim asked quietly. "Contact Judge Park Min-ho at the Provisional Court in Taegu," Jiwoo said. "He evacuated Seoul the same day I did. He will remember me." Kim nodded to his clerk, who immediately began writing. Notes. The verification would take time, but it was necessary. 3 weeks later, everything had changed. The United Nations forces had broken out of the Pusan perimeter after General MacArthur's surprise landing at Incheon. Now Kim found himself riding in a military truck, heading north toward Seoul. The same roads that had carried fleeing refugees south now buzzed with advancing troops and supplies moving in the opposite direction. Judge Lee Jiwoo sat across from him in the back of the truck. Her identity had been confirmed within 2 days of their first meeting. Judge Park Min-ho had not only verified her credentials, but praised her work evacuating civilians from Seoul. Kim had formally apologized and immediately requested her assistance in establishing courts in the recaptured territories. "The reports from Seoul are encouraging," Jiwoo said, reading from a military dispatch. "Most of the communist forces retreated north of the city. The government buildings are damaged, but still standing." Kim nodded as he studied his own papers. "My orders are to establish military tribunals for war crimes as soon as we secure each area. The communist occupation left many cases that need investigation." The truck hit a pothole, and both judges grabbed the sides to steady themselves. Through the canvas cover, Kim could see other military vehicles in their convoy. Jeeps carried officers and radio equipment. Larger trucks transported court records, legal books, and filing cabinets needed to restart the justice system. "We will need to work closely together," Jiwoo said. "Military tribunals handle war crimes, but civilian courts must deal with collaboration, cases, and property disputes." Kim had been thinking the same thing. The communist occupation had created complex legal problems. Some civilians had helped the enemy willingly. Others had been forced to cooperate to protect their families. Determining guilt and innocence would require careful investigation. "I have been studying the Geneva Convention requirements," Kim said. "Military tribunals must follow specific procedures even during active combat." Jiwoo smiled slightly. "And I have been reviewing emergency civil authority statutes. We both have much work ahead." Their truck slowed as they approached a checkpoint. Kim could hear soldiers shouting orders and military vehicles moving into position. Through a gap in the canvas, he saw Korean and American flags flying over a recaptured town. 20 minutes later, they reached their destination. The town of Suwon had been under communist control for 3 months. Now UN forces were setting up headquarters in the damaged city hall. Kim and Jiwoo climbed down from their truck and surveyed the scene. Building walls showed bullet holes and artillery damage. Windows were broken or boarded up. But people were emerging from hiding places, cautiously approaching the UN soldiers. Some waved small Korean flags they had hidden during the occupation. "Captain Kim, Judge Lee," a young lieutenant, approached them. "Colonel Martinez wants to see you immediately. We have urgent cases waiting." They followed the lieutenant into the city hall. The main floor had been converted into a military command center. Radios crackled with reports from advancing units. Officers studied maps and coordinated supply movements. But in the basement, they found something that made both judges stop in shock. 23 prisoners sat on the floor with their hands tied behind their backs. Some wore North Korean army uniforms. Others were civilians. All looked frightened and exhausted. Colonel Martinez, an American military police officer, greeted them. "We captured these people during the advance. Some are enemy soldiers. Others are accused of helping the communists hurt civilians during the occupation. Kim examined the list of charges. Several prisoners were accused of murder, torture, and theft. Others faced lesser charges of collaboration or spreading communist propaganda. "The military prisoners are your responsibility, Captain Kim," Colonel Martinez said, "but some of these civilian cases might need civilian court authority." Jiwoo was already interviewing one of the civilian prisoners, an elderly man accused of informing on his neighbors. She spoke quietly with him in Korean, while Kim reviewed the military cases. Over the next several hours they worked side by side, sorting through the complicated legal situation. Kim questioned the military prisoners about their actions during the occupation. Jiwoo interviewed civilian witnesses and examined evidence of collaboration. "This case is interesting," Jiwoo said during a brief break. She showed Kim a file about a school teacher named Han Soo-jin. She is accused of teaching communist ideas to children, but 3 parents say she actually protected their children from communist recruiters. Kim looked at the evidence. "The military tribunal cannot handle this. It requires civilian court procedures to determine the truth." "Agreed. But we need to coordinate our investigations." Some witnesses saw both military crimes and civilian collaboration in the same incidents. As the day continued, Kim began to appreciate Jiwoo's careful approach to evidence and testimony. She asked detailed questions and cross-checked witness statements. Her legal reasoning was sound, and her knowledge of wartime law impressive. "You handle difficult cases well," Kim told her as they reviewed their progress that evening. "Thank you," Jiwoo replied. "Your military tribunal procedures are very thorough. I am learning much about war crimes law from watching your work." They had established an effective partnership. Kim's military tribunals handled enemy soldiers and clear cases of treason. Jiwoo's civilian court dealt with collaboration questions and disputes between citizens. When cases overlapped, they consulted each other and shared evidence. "Tomorrow we advance further north," Kim said. "More towns, more cases, more complicated legal problems." Jiwoo gathered her papers and prepared to leave. "We will handle them together, Captain Kim. Justice requires both military and civilian authority working properly." Kim watched her go and realized how much his opinion had changed since their first meeting in Busan. The first Chinese shells landed just after midnight, on November 25, 1950. Kim woke to the sound of explosions and running feet. Through his window in Pyongyang, he could see fires burning across the city. Red tracer bullets streaked through the dark sky like deadly fireworks. Someone pounded on his door. "Captain Kim! Emergency orders from headquarters!" Kim grabbed his uniform and pistol. Outside, chaos filled the streets. Military trucks raced in all directions. Soldiers shouted orders in English and Korean. Radio operators called desperately for air support and reinforcements. At the temporary courthouse, Kim found Jiwoo gathering legal documents into boxes. Her face was pale but determined. Around them, clerks and translators packed files and evidence from ongoing cases. "The Chinese have crossed the border in massive numbers," Jiwoo said without looking up from her work. "General MacArthur is ordering immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel." Kim felt his stomach sink. Just 3 weeks ago, they had celebrated reaching the North Korean capital. UN forces had pushed the Communist Army almost to the Chinese border. Victory had seemed certain. Now everything was collapsing. "How many Chinese soldiers?" Kim asked. "Intelligence estimates at least 200,000, Jiwoo replied. "Maybe more. They attacked simultaneously along the entire front line." More explosions shook the building. Plaster dust fell from the ceiling. Through the windows, Kim could see civilians running through the streets carrying suitcases and children. The same panic he had witnessed in Seoul was happening again. "My orders are to establish rear guard positions south of the city," Kim said. "Military tribunals are suspended until further notice." Jiwoo finally looked at him. "My orders are different. The provisional government wants me to help evacuate civilian courts and legal records, but someone needs to coordinate the civilian evacuation from the refugee camps." Kim understood immediately. Thousands of North Korean civilians had fled to UN-controlled areas during the advance north. These people had cooperated with UN forces and would face severe punishment if the communists recaptured them. "That is extremely dangerous," Kim said. If Chinese forces surround the city before the evacuation is complete— I know the risks, Jiwoo interrupted, but these people trusted us. We cannot abandon them. A young sergeant burst through the door. Captain Kim, Colonel Martinez orders you to report to the perimeter defense line immediately. Chinese forces are advancing faster than expected. Kim grabbed his equipment and turned to Jiwoo. How long do you need for the civilian evacuation? At least 12 hours to organize proper transportation. Maybe 18 hours to move everyone safely, Kim calculated quickly. Intelligence reports suggested the Chinese advance would reach Pyongyang within 8 to 10 hours. The math was not encouraging. I will request permission to hold defensive positions as long as possible, Kim said. But if the situation becomes hopeless, you must evacuate immediately. Jiwoo nodded. Understood. And Captain Kim— Thank you. Kim left her coordinating the civilian evacuation and rushed to his military assignment. At the southern edge of Pyongyang, he found American and Korean forces digging defensive positions. Artillery crews prepared their guns, while infantry soldiers checked their weapons and ammunition. Colonel Martinez briefed the officers. Chinese forces are moving south faster than anyone predicted. Our job is to delay their advance and cover the main evacuation routes. We hold these positions until ordered to withdraw. Kim established his command post in a damaged school building. From there, he could coordinate military police activities and maintain communication with headquarters, but he also had a clear view of the refugee camps where Jiwoo was working. Through his binoculars, Kim watched buses and trucks arriving at the camps. Jiwoo moved among the refugees, organizing families and checking transportation lists. Even from a distance, he could see her calm efficiency under pressure. The first Chinese probing attacks began at dawn. Small groups of soldiers tested the UN defensive positions. Kim's military police helped coordinate ammunition supplies and evacuate wounded soldiers. The fighting was light, but everyone knew it would intensify. By midday, the situation had worsened dramatically. Radio reports indicated massive Chinese forces approaching from multiple directions. The main UN army was retreating rapidly, leaving the Pyongyang defenders increasingly isolated. Captain Kim, his radio operator called, Judge Lee is requesting permission to extend the civilian evacuation by 4 more hours. She says half the refugees are still waiting for transportation. Kim looked through his binoculars again. Chinese artillery was beginning to target the city center. Smoke and fire were spreading through the residential areas, but the refugee camps were still crowded with people waiting desperately for rescue. Tell Judge Lee she has 2 more hours maximum, Kim radioed back. After that, Chinese forces will cut off all escape routes. The afternoon brought heavier fighting. Chinese forces launched coordinated attacks against the UN positions. Kim's military police helped establish aid stations for wounded soldiers and maintained communication between scattered defensive units. At 4 p.m., Kim received the order he had been dreading. All units begin immediate withdrawal. Chinese forces have broken through on the Eastern Front. Evacuation must be completed within 1 hour. Kim grabbed his radio and called Jiwoo directly. Judge Lee, you must evacuate now. Chinese forces will be here within the hour. Negative, Captain Kim, came her reply. We still have 200 civilians waiting for the last bus convoy. I cannot abandon them. Kim stared at the approaching Chinese positions through his binoculars. Enemy soldiers were already visible on the northern hills overlooking the city. In 1 hour, maybe less, Pyongyang would be completely surrounded. He faced an impossible choice between his military orders and his conscience. July 27, 1953. The guns fell silent at exactly 10 p.m. After 3 years of fighting, the Korean War had ended in an armistice. Kim stood in the ruins of Seoul, watching smoke rise from the last artillery positions. The sound of silence felt strange after so many months of constant gunfire. 2 years had passed since that terrible day in Pyongyang when Kim had disobeyed his evacuation orders. He had stayed behind with his military police unit to help Jiwoo complete the civilian evacuation. They had saved 847 North Korean refugees, but both had been captured by Chinese forces during the final escape attempt. Kim spent 18 months in a prisoner of war camp near the Yalu River. The conditions were harsh, but he survived by organizing legal education classes for other prisoners. Teaching law helped him maintain hope during the darkest days of captivity. He had heard nothing about Jiwoo during his imprisonment. Chinese guards refused to answer questions about civilian prisoners. Kim feared the worst, but tried to stay optimistic. Jiwoo was strong and intelligent. If anyone could survive captivity, she could. Now, walking through Seoul's damaged streets, Kim searched for any sign of the old legal system. Most government buildings had been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times during the war. Court records were scattered or lost. The entire justice system needed to be reconstructed from scratch. "Captain Kim, is that really you?" Kim turned around and felt his heart jump. Jiwoo stood behind him wearing a clean but simple dress. She looked thinner than he remembered, and her hair showed streaks of grey that had not been there before. But her eyes still held the same intelligent determination. "Judge Lee," Kim said, hardly believing she was real. "You survived." "Barely," Jiwoo replied with a tired smile. "The Chinese kept civilian prisoners in a separate camp near Kaesong. The conditions were difficult, but we helped each other survive." They stood awkwardly for a moment, both remembering their last desperate hours in Pyongyang. Then Kim did something he had planned for 2 years. He bowed deeply in the formal Korean manner, holding the position longer than usual. "Judge Lee, I owe you a sincere apology, not just for my mistake in Busan, but for doubting your character and judgment when we first met." Jiwoo looked surprised. "Captain Kim, that is not necessary. We were both doing our duty under impossible circumstances." "No," Kim said, straightening up. "It is necessary. You were right about the law protecting all citizens, not just those in uniform. You were right about the importance of mercy alongside justice. I learned much from watching you work." Jiwoo studied his face carefully. "And I learned much from you about the importance of proper procedures and evidence. We made a good team despite our difficult beginning." Kim smiled for the first time in months. "Are you planning to return to judicial work? The new government has asked me to help establish civilian courts in the reconstruction zones," Jiwoo said. "What about you? Will you continue with military law?" "Actually, I am transferring back to civilian service," Kim replied. "The army is reducing its legal staff now that the war is over. I hope to work on rebuilding the regular court system." They walked together through the busy streets. Construction workers were everywhere, rebuilding homes and businesses. Children played in the rubble, their laughter a hopeful sound after years of war. Food vendors sold rice and vegetables from small carts, bringing normal life back to the devastated city. "The legal challenges will be enormous," Jiwoo said. "Property disputes, war crimes trials, family separations, business contracts disrupted by the fighting. We need experienced judges who understand both military and civilian law." Kim nodded. "And judges who understand the human cost of legal decisions. The war taught me that law without compassion becomes mere bureaucracy." They stopped at a partially rebuilt courthouse. Construction crews were installing new windows and repairing the roof. A small sign indicated it would reopen as Seoul District Court within 3 months. "I have a proposal," Jiwoo said. "The Ministry of Justice is establishing a special reconstruction court system. We need judges who can handle complex cases involving both military and civilian law. Are you interested in working together officially?" Kim considered the offer. Working with Jiwoo again meant acknowledging her as an equal colleague, not just someone he had once misjudged. It meant setting aside his pride and focusing on their shared commitment to justice. "I would be honored to work with you, Judge Lee," Kim said formally. "Then we should start immediately," Jiwoo replied. "I have files for 43 cases waiting for resolution, property disputes, custody battles, and several war crimes cases that require both military and civilian expertise." They entered the damaged courthouse together. In the main hall, clerks were sorting through boxes of legal documents salvaged from various locations. Law books were stacked on tables, many showing water damage or bullet holes. "Judge Lee," Kim said as they surveyed the work ahead, "I think we will make a better team this time." "I agree, Judge Kim," Jiwoo replied using his new civilian title. "We both learned important lessons during the war. Now we can use that knowledge to help rebuild justice in Korea." They rolled up their sleeves and began sorting through the first case files. Outside, the construction crews continued their work, rebuilding a nation one brick at a time.